Welcome back, everyone, and to those who are joining us for the first time today, welcome. I'd also like to call your attention to the full schedule of events and the code of conduct, which is available on our website. Thank you for attending the second session of the DH at Wake Summer Institute, the Mariah Edgeworth Letters. I am Molly Keener, Director of Digital Initiatives and Scholarly Communication at the Z. Smith Reynolds Library at Wake Forest University, and I am pleased to welcome today's presenter, Jessica Richard. Jessica is Associate Professor and Chair of English at Wake Forest. She has published on gambling in 18th century British culture, Jane Austen, Samuel Johnson, and polar exploration. Her current book project is on forms of knowledge in Jane Austen. She is the founder and co-editor of the Interinstitutional Digital Humanities Projects, the 18th Century Common, and the one we're going to hear about today, the Mariah Edgeworth Letters. Please join me in welcoming Jessica.
Thank you, Molly. It says that I can't start my video because the host has stopped it, which is okay. I can go ahead without video. So just let me know.
You are now able to share your video, I believe.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate. And I will just tell you about this project and look forward to answering your questions. So now that you see me briefly, I will just share my slideshow and start from there. So Mariah Edgeworth is a really interesting and important, wait a minute, am I actually sharing this? I'm not, am I? Sorry.
Not yet.
Not yet. I just realized that I clicked on it but didn't share it. Okay, really good at this.
Yeah. And Jessica, just so you know, your audio is a little bit crackly.
Okay. Let me just turn off my headphones and try it without that.
Okay.
Okay. So does that audio better?
That is better. You're a little faint, but you're not crackly.
Okay. Well, I'll see if I can speak loudly and let me know if you have any problem. Okay.
We will. Thank you.
Okay. So now I hope you can see my slideshow and you can hear me. Yes? Okay. So Mariah Edgeworth. She, as I said in the intro on the website, is probably the most important novelist at the turn of the 19th century in the era of Jane Austen that few people have actually heard of. But she was incredibly well known in her day, probably the most important and most famous novelist in the period from 1800 to 1814, right when Jane Austen was beginning to publish, when Sir Walter Scott was publishing. But she has become more obscure. And I think in part that actually has to do with the challenge of her letters, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. But she wrote some really important and famous novels, and I've listed a couple of them here. Castle Rackrent, Belinda, Harrington, quite a few more, published between 1800 and the early 1840s. She also was incredibly well known because she wrote educational works with her father, Richard Lovell Edgeworth, and they were followers of Rousseau and also of other progressive educationalists. In fact, her father tried to educate his oldest child, her brother, according to the tenets of Rousseau, and wasn't particularly successful. But they were really interested in a kind of child-led learning and in what we now think of as sort of progressive tenets of education. So they wrote pedagogical works, stories, stories aimed at different levels of ages of readers and also different classes of readers. So they were very well known for that as well. Part of the reason that they were interested in education is because Richard Lovell had an enormous family. Mariah Edgeworth was the second of 22 children. She had 3 successive stepmothers, some of whom near the end were closer to her own age. And she helped them and her father educate these children at their family estate in Edgeworthstown County, Longford. So again, so she was well known both for her fictional work and for her educational work. And because she not only had this enormous family, she had a huge a huge epistolary network because of all of these siblings and their connections, but also because of her and her father's fame. So she corresponded with the most important writers, politicians, thinkers, philosophers of her day, and of quite a long period of time, particularly from the late 1790s through the 1840s. So her work is really important, and her letters are really important, but they've never really received any kind of edition. As I say here, there has been no definitive scholarly edition. There have been a few selections and collections published over the years. Most of them have not been edited by scholars, so they're and mostly they've been silently amended. So things that might seem boring were edited out, and there are very little annotations. There was one Oxford edition of some of the letters, and that's out of print. So there's been no definitive scholarly edition. And this is really in large part because there are just so many letters. Who would take this on? It's an enormous prospect. Just imagine the letters that would come from a family of 22 siblings. Then there's all the other people that they corresponded with. And these have all been, many of them have been kept. So it's just an enormous quantity of letters. And they're held in archives around the world. Some of them are in the Bodleian in Oxford, some of them at the National Library in Ireland, some of them are at the Royal Society in Ireland, some of them are at her estate, her family estate, which is no longer owned privately or in the family, in County Longford. There are selections and collections of Edgeworth letters in North Carolina, in New York, in California, literally all over the world, in Switzerland. So doing a kind of conventional print edition of the letters seems almost impossible. Other challenges include that some institutions limit access to or handling of letters to preserve them. This is especially true of the collection that's in the National Library of Ireland, which dates from the 1800s to about 1817, probably the most important period of her life. And those have been handled a lot by scholars and are falling apart. So they've limited access very severely to those. And then the other challenge I think presented by the letters is just the question of why they matter. Why should we pursue this project if it's so massive and presents these kinds of challenges? And in some ways, this is the hardest question to answer, the hardest challenge to address, because we can't really know until we do a kind of big edition of the letters why they might matter and what we could learn from them. But what we think you would learn is about these networks and about the ways not only that Edgeworth participated in these intellectual networks across England and Ireland, and the rest of her family, but also ways that other people from, as I said, politicians to humanists and thinkers were participating in intellectual discourse communities and networks. And so this has the potential to really shed fascinating light on the kinds of communication networks that were in place and were taking place through letter exchanges from across the first 40 or 50 years of the 19th century. But we can't really make that case until we actually do start editing the letters to be able to map out some of those connections. My interest in this project first started when I was attended a panel at a conference in 2016 where it was called The Future of Edgeworth Studies, and we're circling around the question that often comes up, which is why don't more people seem to study Edgeworth's work when she was such an important literary figure in her time? And someone said, why don't we have an edition of the letters? We really need an edition of the letters. And it occurred to me that a digital project could perhaps address some of these challenges in ways that other conventional print scholarly publications had not been able to address them. And so I knew that we had resources at Wake Forest to start exploring this, and I began collaborating to start seeing if we could address some of these challenges that the letters have presented since the 1850s to editors and collectors. So how can a digital edition address these challenges? So first, if there's no definitive scholarly edition, what can a digital edition do? First, it just doesn't have the same constraints as book publishing. So we are not looking at a physical project with multiple volumes. And of course, digital work has constraints in terms of storage, servers, etc. But it can be something that can continuously be additive as long as we have support. We can also publish online in progress, and that seems really important and really exciting, that an edition here can start to bring the people in these networks and in these letters to the surface almost as soon as we begin posting letters and publishing letters. We can't make definitive claims about these networks without a large sort of sample, but we can start seeing things, ideas, people, figures, connections can emerge while the work is in progress, which is very different from book publishing. So that's really exciting. As I mentioned, one of the problems so far in what publishing there has been of these letters is that they haven't been edited by scholars for the most part. And a collaborative multi-institutional digital edition can bring Edgeworth scholars together so that the letters do get scholarly annotation. And that's one of the things that's been really exciting about this so far for me, is been working with other Edgeworth scholars who have worked much more with the letters than I have. I've been written mostly about her fiction and her educational work. So it's not that you can't collaborate in that way on print work, but the digital environment does allow us to do the work collaboratively in ways that are really productive. The challenge of volume. There's thousands of letters, they're held all over the world. The digital edition can accommodate this volume of letters, and especially important here is that collaborators near archives can contribute to the project. So this is a really important part of our vision for this project. It's not exactly crowdsourced, although we certainly could take collaborators who are outside of academia, but particularly we can draw on scholars who are near archives, who might only have the time or the inclination to participate in a very small way through one letter or several letters. And so they can participate and contribute so that the main editors don't have to actually travel to all of these locations, but we can draw on collaborators where these archives are. And that's already started to happen as we've gotten people who are in New York to contribute. I've used the archive of Edgeworth letters that are held in North Carolina. So this, again, the digital environment makes it possible for us to draw on people all over the place. And then costs and resources can be shared, and this is something that we're working on moving forward in the next couple of years of our project, is moving beyond the primary digital support being at Wake Forest and drawing on support from other institutions. And I think this project offers a big solution to the challenge of preservation. And this is an argument that we are making in particular to archives that might be hesitant about allowing us to photograph or edit the letters, that digital surrogates such as photographs and transcriptions will obviously contribute to the conservation of the originals. And then finally, why do Edgeworth's letters matter? Networks of 19th century thinkers, politicians, and writers can be mapped when the letters are digitized. And we're already looking at a range of ways of trying to draw that material out of the letters and to develop their significance to the project. This is just a picture of one of the letters. This is a letter that Mariah Edgeworth wrote in response to a letter that she received. It's held at UNC Chapel Hill. In 1815, she received a letter from an American living in Warrenton, North Carolina, named Rachel Lazarus. And Edgeworth had just published in the previous couple of years a novel that included a characterization of a Jewish character that was sort of typically anti-Semitic for early 19th century representation. And so Rachel Lazarus, who was Jewish living in North Carolina, wrote to her, to Edgeworth, and said, you know, I'm a big fan, I like your work, but I really wish you would write a different kind of characterization of the Jewish character. Rachel, Lazarus, and her father were also involved in, they ran a school in North Carolina. And this is interesting because, of course, Edgeworth and her father were also famous as educators and as pedagogical thinkers. So they connected across this shared interest. So, so Rachel sent this letter, and Richard Lovell, Mariah's father, and Mariah herself both wrote back, and this is Edgeworth's response. And this initiated a correspondence that continued through generations of these two families into the 1940s. And so that's beyond the scope of our project, but just really cool. And so there's UNC holds these papers, both sides of the correspondence. And I went with funding from Wake Forest with an undergraduate research assistant last summer to photograph these letters. So now to show you a little bit of our project. These are screenshots from the initial sort of beta phase of our web project. So it's called mariahedgeworth.org, and tells you about the fact that this is the site for our collaborative digital edition. Here are the participants. So it's a group of 4 of us, scholars at different universities with different areas of expertise in Edgeworth studies. And we've been collaborating for a couple of years, and hugely supported and shared, this work is shared with our digital team, without whom we would not be moving forward at all. And we're also using undergraduate and graduate students as they're available at these institutions. As we've been working on this over the last couple of years, we learned that there's also a digitization project for the Edgeworth letters in its very early stages at Oxford University at the Bodleian Library and at the National Library of Ireland. These two institutions jointly hold a big cache of Edgeworth papers, and the first half of that cache is and it was given to the 2 institutions by a descendant. First half is at the National Library of Ireland, is the one I mentioned earlier that's in pretty bad physical condition. And the second half of the cache, really mostly letters after Edgeworth stopped publishing novels and after her father died. And that's at the Bodleian Library. So in December, I was able to go to a conference in Oxford and meet with the people who were involved in the beginnings of this project. And this helped clarify for us what we're going to focus on. Their hope is eventually that they will be able to digitize that massive selection of the Edgeworth letters that they have at those 2 institutions. And then for the rest of the letters in various places around the world, we are going to be focusing on them for our project. So we've been in touch about making sure that our TEI codes are compatible, that we're using the same template for the letters, that we are collecting information about the letters in the same way, so that our 2 projects, even if they continue to always be 2 separate projects, will be completely compatible, and our data will be shareable, so that scholars will eventually be able to have something like all of the letters at hand. So the goals of our project, we have really 3 main goals: to track the worldwide locations of the letters. So this is the first thing that I hadn't really realized until I started digging into this, which is that the letters are everywhere, but there's no one place you can go to find out where they are. So I keep learning about a place here or a place there that might have 2 or 3 letters. So one of the goals, and even if we never did anything beyond this, it would, I think, be a really important contribution, is simply to collect all of that information about where letters by Mariah Edgeworth exist, and hopefully at least who wrote who she was writing to, dates, and perhaps basic subject information. So that's our first goal. At the same time, we're also trying to create a continuously growing collaborative digital edition of Edgeworth letters, as I've already been describing. And then finally, our hope is that our website can also provide a space for digital projects using data from our site. And so again, as these letters become available, we're interested in anyone really using that data to help us understand what's possible and what's available. So one of the, I'll show you that stuff in a minute. So this is just a little screenshot of our spreadsheet in progress. And you can get a little example here of where some of the letters are. So again, that's a massive undertaking. We're just trying to make as definitive a list as we can of where all of the letters are. And every time I talk to a new Edgeworth scholar, I learn about another location, such as Switzerland, where there happen to be. As we create a collaborative edition, this is another really big part of our project. So we have this workflow. We try to get a photograph, then do a plain text transcription, and finally TEI, or text encoding initiative coding, so that the letters are machine readable. Our goal here is that any scholar or faculty or mentored students, or really anyone who feels that they have the expertise here that we can vet, can participate in any aspect of the workflow. So someone can photograph the letters, and that might be the end of their interest. Someone can transcribe letters that someone else has photographed, and even a third person could do TEI coding. And in the TEI, we're able to list and give credit to every single person who has participated in the workflow on a single letter. So that's something that I think is really important and exciting about this digital environment, is that we can bring people in at varying levels of commitment, and we can make sure that those people are credited. We are including letters both from Mariah Edgeworth and to her when the letters to her are deemed significant. This was a big challenge for us, and something we had some disagreement about. I was concerned about the volume of how many letters we already were dealing with if we also tried to transcribe those that she was receiving when they're available in the archives, and they aren't always. But when they're important and they contribute to your understanding of the letters she wrote, we decided it was important to include them. So for example, the letters that Rachel Lazarus wrote to Mariah Edgeworth are a very important part of that correspondence. And Edgeworth's responses to her are as important as her initial letter. So it wouldn't be very interesting to see Edgeworth's response to Rachel Lazarus, where she assures her that in fact she is working on a new novel with a more positive representation of a Jewish character. That wouldn't be as compelling if we didn't know that Rachel had written to her critiquing her earlier representation of Jewish men. And then we have plain text transcription, which is both makes possible a variety of different kinds of DH applications, and then the TEI coding that will make it easy for us to generate a sense of people, places, subjects, languages, all kinds of things that we are coding for. So I'll give you this very short example. And this isn't a particularly significant letter, but I think it illustrates sort of some of what's possible here. So you can see this is from the New York Public Library. We have the photograph of the side that has the address on it. 18th century and early 19th century letters didn't have envelopes for the most part. They use the letter itself as an envelope folded over. And so you see her writing on the outside and the inside. And this is our photograph. And here's our plain text transcription. And again, this doesn't seem like a especially exciting letter. My dear sir, I'm extremely obliged to you for the tickets for the African institution, though it will be impossible for me to be able to go to Newgate on that day. But I don't wish that Mrs. Fry should make any alteration in her arrangements on my account, as I shall make some friend of mine very happy by giving them my tickets. My sister's joining compliments and disbowering. You're sincerely obliged, Mariah Edgeworth. So the things that jump out to me here are wanting to know a bunch of things, like what was the African institution? What was the event that she had tickets for? How common was it for her to have those kinds of tickets? Who's Mrs. Fry? Who is Mr. Bowering who's receiving this letter? And who is Mrs. Bowering? Why is she writing to her husband and not to the wife? So there's lots of possible stories embedded in this seemingly very mundane declining of a ticket that she can't use. And our hope would be that coding and then annotation would help, would start to illuminate a possible story that this letter might tell. This is an example of the TEI coding for the same letter. So you could see the plain text, and now this TEI coding, which tags particular attributes so that we could find, you know, eventually, does Mrs. Bowering appear in multiple letters? We would be able to find that. We are thinking about the website display and what we want for, what we want the actual display to look like. Our current site is basic, but this is a screenshot of a display at the Shelley Godwin Archive, which is a big multi-institutional project. And as you can see, it shows a photograph on one side and then a transcription on the other side. And so that's sort of what we, something like that is what we're envisioning, and one of our later stages in funding applications will be for more complicated web development that will allow us to do a side-by-side display. Okay, and then I said, oh, another one of our goals is to provide a space for digital projects using data from our site. So let's see if I'm able to show you this. Okay, hopefully you're able to see this. So this is really rudimentary, but right now on our site we have an example of some data visualizations pulled from a very problematic late 19th, early 20th century selected edition of the Letters of Edgeworth that was done by someone named Augustus Hare. And so this is, it's not scholarly, it's not complete. The letters have been silently edited, so things are omitted. Nonetheless, we have some examples of the different kinds of large-scale corpus analysis that you can do there. Another project that we're looking for, I'm trying to remember how to get back to showing the rest of my slideshow. Okay,
we can see your slides right now.
Oh, you can. Okay,
yes,
great. Okay. That's good. Okay, so another example of a visualization project that we're hoping to post on the site will be actually a map of where the letters are located. That will help demonstrate both the network of the geographical network of correspondence, as well as the current geographical spread of these letters to help demonstrate kind of how our project is developing. The last picture I have here is just of a neat thing. The great part about one of the really wonderful things about working in archives, of course, is the things you find that you didn't know would be there. And this is from UNC in the Rare Book Room, looking at the archive of Maria Edgeworth letters and Rachel Lazarus Mordecai letters. And tucked inside them was this drawing of Edgeworth's town, of their house, which they had sent to Rachel. And it was drawn by Mariah's sister, Honora. So this is just a neat drawing. The house is still standing, but as I said, it's not a private residence anymore, and it's not any kind of Edgeworth site. But it was just a neat find, and something that, well, there are many other images of Edgeworth's house that are out there in circulation. This isn't one that's necessarily well known, and again, the kind of thing that we can easily include in our edition and share with people. So I just wanted to end with that image, and that is the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to take questions.
So hey everyone, I'm Heather Barnes. I'm the Digital Curation Librarian at ZSR Library, and I will be helping moderate this Q&A session. If you have questions for Jessica, please submit them into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom right of your Zoom window. And we have one initial question. Have you been trying to use OCR and OCR process to identify some of the characters from the photographs? And if so, what are your guidelines for photographs? Does it matter what type of camera or phone resolution? What kind of standards do you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that there are some programs that you can train to use to learn handwriting, but we have not used that yet. We don't have that volume of photographs, and I think we're still in the early enough stages where we want to actually be reading these photographs with human eyes and transcribing them from at that level. So we're not using OCR yet, and it's possible that we could explore that at some future date. But I think we're still mostly interested in actually sort of making sure that someone who has some familiarity with early 19th century paleography is really putting their eyes on the text. Right now, we're just taking photographs with our phones, or we're asking archives if they have photographs or if they'll take photographs. Eventually, we will hope to have funding where we can commission high quality, high resolution images for the website. And that might be a time where we look for, we would have to think about what are the most important letters that we would need to focus on for that kind of funding. But that's not something that is a part of our process at this point. Although eventually, ideally, I would love to have high quality images of all of the letters. There's also some letters that we can't photograph. So for example, I was at the British Library in December, and some things were photographable. I was allowed to photograph them, and some I wasn't. So I just transcribed them right there, and we will never have photographs of those letters. But they're still useful for the site. They're part of, they might be part of the papers of a particular person, and the collection of that person, for whatever reason, I don't understand what the British Library's rules are, but for whatever reason, that particular person's papers, you're not allowed to photograph. So we would never have those as photographs on the site, but we would still be able to include them in the digital data as raw text and as TI coded. So I think to summarize, we don't really have any standards right now for what we're looking for in terms of photographs. We're just trying to get the material to get the project moving forward. So we have the UNC letters, we have British Library letters, we have some from the Huntington, some from the New York Library. And what we're really doing right now is trying to get people, either scholars who already have photographs in their own collections from their own notes and projects in the past, to contribute those, or transcriptions. And then once someday archives open again, we're hoping to have people go and take photographs that we can use, that they can transcribe, that others can transcribe the project. And then eventually, again, hoping that we'll be able to get funding for high quality scans and images.
Great. Okay, the next question. This looks like a huge project. What kind of time frame are you predicting, and are you sort of coordinating this?
Right. I can't really think too much about that, or it's terrifying if I do. So earlier this year, Ken Price, who is the editor of the Walt Whitman Archive, which is a massive digital project, was in residence at Wake Forest. I went to a presentation that he gave, and he mentioned that he had been working on this project for 25 years. And I wailed. It was definitely anxiety producing. I don't really know. I don't have a good handle on how long this will take, but I think it will be a very long time. And so what we're really trying to do is to think about stages. So as I said, the first, the two stages that are happening simultaneously, one is to simply chart where the letters are located. And if we never finish the rest of it, that will be a valuable contribution. And then we're trying to think about sort of grantable stages. So we're currently, you might say, working on like proof of concept. Here we have some letters that we've started to code. We're going to start to display them. And what we need next is some funding for a higher, sort of fancier website display. And then we have to start thinking about what additional funding phases look like. My collaborator at the University of Tennessee got an internal digital humanities grant there, and she has 2 research project student research assistants who are going to be working in the spring. And that's one of our tasks, is to start thinking about what are the next phases. And then always along the way is trying to think about how to keep our coordination going with the Anglo-Irish Bodleian and National Library of Ireland project. So staying in touch with them and finding out kind of where they are so that we're all moving kind of forward at what might be a similar pace and certainly with the same goals. So yeah, it's going to be massive. I don't know. All of us who are the lead scholarly participants in the project are tenured, which I think is really important. It gives us the freedom to start something that doesn't have an end date. And it also makes us very mindful when other people want to participate that we're both crediting them and being careful that they don't get kind of sucked into some enormous thing. So so it's a project that we're doing while we're all each other doing other of our other kinds of scholarly projects. And I don't know when, I don't even know how to estimate when it will end, because I still don't even know the number. How many letters are there? I don't even have that number yet.
Great. So the next question. So this is such an exciting project and an absolutely stunning website. I also love the way that you made it possible for other people to join in and contribute. This is something that Hidden Town team has been thinking about quite a bit, especially when it comes to potentially bringing in other students as interns or RAs. Probably undergrads who have taken the course who want to do more, and maybe also graduate students. You mentioned working with an undergrad in Chapel Hill and also other work with students, and I'd like to know what you did to make that happen, student work.
Great. So my students have been funded through the Eureka Summer Research Fellowships, and I had one last summer and I have one this summer. And in both of those cases, as those of you who are at Wake Forest know, this is an Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity Award, which gives students funding to work on an independent research project of their own devising that dovetails or coordinates with a faculty research project. So they're not a research assistant per se, and they're doing a project that is of interest to them. So last summer, my student Andrew Murphy wrote a paper and gave a presentation at Undergraduate Research Day that was about Edgeworth and her family and just the things that he had learned there. And the work for us that he did included working on the spreadsheet. He went with me to Chapel Hill and we photographed those letters together. So I got to introduce him to kind of working in a rare book room. And in fact, he, as a result of that experience, not just that day, but the whole experience of working on this, he decided to apply on graduation to the library science degree at UNC, which he'll be starting very soon. So that was a cool outcome. He was an English major, and so that's what we did with him. And then this summer, I have a student who's a journalism minor and an English major, and she's interested in thinking about how letters were part of 19th century news transmission. And so she's reading and learning about 19th century English news, journalism, letters, and she's again writing a paper on that, but she's also transcribing, and she just emailed me today her first TEI coded letter. So so she'll do some of that work of just transcribing and coding, and then most of her summertime she'll also spend on her independent mentored research with me. As I mentioned, Hillary Havens at University of Tennessee has graduate students who will be working probably in a more intensive and direct way as research assistants, both working on the spreadsheet of locations, working on coding and transcribing, and also working on grant planning and long-term planning for the project. So, you know, I think at Wake Forest in particular, we have this great option through Eureka in the summer, and then Eureka X, which is a more direct research assistance program during the semester where a student can do a certain number of hours of work on your project directly. So those are great resources to check out. We also have Susan Eggenolf at the University of Texas A&M. She had a student as well who won a funding award and also did some transcribing and coding right around the time that we all went remote. So again, I think different institutions have many institutions have some kind of support for students, and particularly around coding. I think there's some interest in teaching students some of those skills.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, are you able to, or is the user able to download TEI files? And are you considering sharing those more widely, more broadly to increase discoverability? Not unsure as to what aggregators of TEI actually exist.
Yeah, I certainly plan that. That's my understanding of the whole point of this would be for people to be able to have access to those files to do what they want with them, whether it's the raw text or the TEI files. That's not an area that I know a lot about, but certainly that's going to be an important part of the use of this, is not simply the display on our site, but for people to be able to download the files and do whatever it is that they want to explore. And then the results of that come, get posted on our site or get published in journals or wherever. That would be up to the person, as long as we were accredited. So that's really important. That kind of access to the data is, again, exactly why a digital project is valuable, and offers unique value that a printed project.
And then I just had one last question. In terms of a broader content analysis, what are you most hoping to learn from her letters as a whole?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's one that we circle around a lot. Again, actually, because I haven't read a lot of her letters, even in the printed form, I don't really know. We started asking this question by framing it as like, what are our research questions? What do we want to know from the letters? But I think that there's been so little aggregation of the letters that we don't actually even know yet what we could know about them, other than the very general things that I gestured towards, such as the extent of networks. When I was in London in December, I just keep saying that because it feels so magical. There was a time when we traveled and it was amazing. When I was there, one of the letters that I transcribed was between Edgeworth and Charles Babbage. And that's cool. She wrote to Charles Babbage. They were correspondents. So that was not unknown to people. But what did that mean to have this elderly, at that point, novelist writing to Charles Babbage, or writing to Sir Robert Peel, a major politician of the time period? I think there's a lot of possible stories that we can tell about the ways that political, scientific, and literary spheres were interacting in the early 19th century through these letters and through these networks. And we don't even know yet what those stories are going to